Welcome to the second day of EAAMO' 2023. We are delighted to have you with us, either in person or virtually. We are also very excited to have Yeukai Chideya as our keynote speaker today. Yeukai is a PhD student in public health at Stellenbosch University. Her research interests include trauma, mental health, and refugee studies. In fact, she has extensive experience working with refugees and people affected with humanitarian crises. For a decade prior to her PhD studies, she held various senior roles at the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture in Cape Town. Today, she's going to share with us some of her knowledge, experience, and vision on restoring the dignity of people in crisis. Yeukai, it's an honor to have you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Morning, everyone. I would like to thank you all for inviting me to the conference. So what I'm going to do this morning, I'm going to take you on a journey, which has led me to be where I am today speaking to you. But the first question that I have, if you were going to be asked to help someone who has been displaced by a humanitarian crisis, what would you donate and why? It's actually a question that I would want to get answers from the audience. If you were going to donate to a family that has been displaced by a humanitarian crisis, what would you donate and why? Anyone? There are no right or wrong answers.
I would say money because they can probably choose what they want to do with it.
Okay, money, so that they can choose what they can do with it. Anyone else? Clothing,
Like a first aid kit.
First aid kit,
Feminine products and diapers.
feminine products and diapers. Yeah, thank you. So I'll come back to what she has said because that's part of my talk today. Thank you. So originally, I am from Zimbabwe. I grew up in a small town called Marondera. It's about 60 kilometers away from the main city. So in Zimbabwe, my dad was a well-known person in the small town that we lived, and he had a friendship with a man called Charles. Charles was a psychotic individual who lived on the streets. So every time when we would go to the grocery shops, my dad will have a conversation with Charles for a very long time. And before he left, he would give Charles some money to buy food. This was our routine for over a decade. And just watching my dad interact with Charles, he taught my siblings and I the principles of generosity and treating everyone that we know with dignity. So based on my relationship with my dad and seeing how my dad interacted with Charles, it then gave me the passion of wanting to help people. By the time I got to primary school, people started calling me Oprah Winfrey because I used to help people whenever I could. By the time I got to high school, they were now calling me Sis Dolly. So Sis Dolly was a magazine columnist. You would write to her whenever you had problems, and then she would respond in the magazine to tell you what you could do based on the problem that you would have stated. And when I completed my high school, unfortunately, my dad lost his job, so he was unemployed, and that made me end up going into a gap year. So during the gap year, a friend was applying to UCT. So UCT is the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and they decided to apply on my behalf. So UCT then responded, sent me their prospectus. When I went through the prospectus, I saw social work. And when I read about social work, it felt like someone had taken what was in my heart and put it on paper. But that's when I realized I wanted to become a social worker. So fortunately, my dad got his job at the end of the year, and I was enrolled at UCT from 2004, right until I completed my master's degree in clinical social work in 2011. My first job as a social worker was at the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture. Prior to that, Trauma Center was known as the County House. It was established in 1898 by the Anglican Church. So in 1898, the Anglican monks came to Western Cape to provide services to the Western Cape people. And then in 1978, the Anglican Church started providing support to families who had their loved ones jailed at Robben Island. So for those that don't know, South Africa went through an apartheid era for many years, and the political activists were being imprisoned at Robben Island. So what used to happen back then, you need to apply to visit Robben Island, and once they gave you that permission, you need to immediately come. But what the regime back then used to do, they'll tell you come today, and maybe you are somewhere 5,000 kilometers apart. So the Cowley House began saying, if you want to visit your loved one at Robben Island, you could come to the Cowley House, make your application, and then you're allowed to go on the same day. In the picture, that's Winnie Mandela with their child. So what she used to do, she would come to the Cowley House, make an application so that she could visit the late Nelson Mandela. In 1990, the Cowley House then changed to start providing support to the political activists that were being released from Robben Island. So, so as the picture does, those are the prisoners at Robben Island. So once they were released to go back home, they'll go to the Cowley House to receive rehabilitation and counseling, and then they'll go home. So the trauma center was then established in 1993, and part of their vision is to provide a non-violent society in South Africa which respects human rights and is committed to addressing trauma through inclusive healing processes. Their clientele includes women, children, and refugees. And part of their services is providing counseling, debriefing, workshops, and training. I'm just going to briefly share with you the context which the trauma center works in, according to the stats in South Africa. So South Africa has a population of 60 million people, and the majority of the population, they do not have access to basic needs such as education, sanitation, and food. 80% of the wealth in South Africa belongs to 10% of the population. South Africa is known as one of the most unequal countries in the world. From what you can see on the slide, that's a neighborhood in Johannesburg, which is one of the cities in South Africa. So the first part is a neighborhood that's called Sandton. Those who know South Africa, this is one of the most affluent places in South Africa. It's separated by a highway, and the next neighborhood is Alex or Alexandra, and it's one of the most the area that has a lot of poor people. So violence in South Africa, the crime rate is very high. It's actually in the world, it's the third highest country that has a high crime rate. And then it's also one of the countries in the world that has a high rate of intentional injury compared to unintentional injury. So intentional injury is caused by interpersonal violence such as gang violence, domestic violence, and community violence. And in unintentional injury is caused by accidents. And in terms of stats, between April and June 2023, the murder rate in South Africa went up by 3.4%. In this context, South Africa receives a lot of people from different parts of Africa coming to seek refuge and asylum. The population of refugees currently in South Africa is over 250,000. Unlike other African countries whereby the refugees are coming from their neighboring countries, most of the refugees are coming from all over Africa. So they have refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zimbabwe, Burundi, Somalia, just to name a few. So when an asylum seeker comes to South Africa, the first thing that they need to do, they go to the refugee center. There they'll state why they are looking for refuge. From there, they're given a permit, and this permit is between 2 to 3 months, and it needs to be renewed until their application has been reviewed. Once the application has been reviewed, they'll be told if they qualify to become a refugee or they have to go back to their country. So the main challenge with this process, which then comes to the barriers, is that it can take up to 20 years before you know if you are a refugee or not. And once you get into the country, like you get in as a single person, you get married and you have children, it takes a very long time before your children can become asylum seekers. So at the end of it all, the 250,000 that I've spoken about, those are just the documented refugees and asylum seekers, as some of their children are not documented at this stage. Besides the challenges with documentation, which also there is for them to find it difficult to get employment, refugees and asylum seekers in South Africa, they face what we know as xenophobia. So xenophobia is an attitude or behavior towards foreign nationals, and this leads them to being vilified. And the triggers of xenophobia, as I explained earlier, that South Africa is quite divided. There is a high rates of poverty. There's no employment or lack of employment. So with that, the foreign nationals, they come and add an additional pressure onto the little resources that the country has. And the consequences that it has now is that as a refugee who left Congo, most probably when they left there, their families were massacred. They come into South Africa looking for refuge, and then they now have to face the xenophobic attacks, which sometimes leads to murders and gang rapes. So the impact that xenophobia and all those things that I've spoken about, what it has on the asylum seekers is that it affects their mental health. So often as a social worker working at the trauma center back then, I would have to take the refugees to the hospital because they were suicidal. Some were told with post-traumatic stress disorder, and others had depression, just to name a few mental health challenges. Financially, South Africa only provides a social grant if you're a refugee. But if you compare the numbers of the refugees and asylum seekers, there are very little people who have refugee status compared to those who are asylum seekers. So the asylum seekers, they don't have any social support or money for them to be able to do what they need to do. And what we saw whilst I was working at the trauma center was that the fathers were now abandoning their families because they couldn't support them. So we find that there were a lot of asylum seeker families who were now being aided by single mothers. A big concern for the refugees and asylum seekers was safety, because already South Africa has a high rate of crime. As a refugee or an asylum seeker, it's very easy for people to identify that you're a foreign national. Sometimes it's because of how you wear and also the way you speak. I'll share a case study based on one of my long-term clients. I'll give a name called Grace, but that's not her real name. So with Grace, it was a few years ago, I was called in to say there was a refugee client that was crying uncontrollably at the reception area. When I went to speak to Grace, I then discovered that she had been in the country for over 5 years. But when she entered the country and she was interviewed, number one, she was interviewed by a male. Number two, she barely understood what the person was saying. So she gave a story that she was told by other people to give, which was not the real reason why she was in the country. So when her refugee application was reviewed, understandably, she was then told that she didn't qualify. So when she came to the trauma center, she had been given a must leave, and a must leave is you have to leave the country within 10 days. So what needed to happen was we had to reach out to a law firm that we normally work with. The lawyers had then approached the High Court, and at the end of it all, her asylum seeker permit was renewed, and with time, she ended up getting a refugee status. But the story for Grace is not the norm. Most times, many of the refugee clients, they end up not having that status. They remain as asylum seekers. So the impact on mental health professionals is when you work with clients who are exposed to either trauma or the xenophobia attack that I've been talking about, the first thing as a mental health professional, you want to help. So you are determined to help your participants. But sadly, there's what we call the cycle of violence. So maybe today they come to you because their child is being bullied at school, they want you to intervene. After a few months, they're coming because their husband has disappeared. They don't know if they've been murdered or they've run away from home. So you continuously deal with the same client for many years. And unfortunately, the main reason that they're coming to you are safety concerns. And as a mental health professional, that's not something that you're able to help them with. So you find that mental health professionals working in the trauma field, they end up feeling burnt out. You also feel hopeless because it's very difficult for you to provide the support that's needed. And you end up feeling as a failure because continuously you are trying to help your participants or your clients. So I am in research, I'm so used to participants, but I mean clients. So in the midst of working at the trauma center in 2013, I traveled home to visit my family. So I'm one of those people who will pay the night before and then in the morning it's just putting the zip on and I'm out. But on this day, as I'm closing the zip, I realized my bag is torn. And it was too late for me to do anything because I only had one travel bag. So fortunately, you know those bags that I said flip. So I just thought, okay, I'm fine. I just need to put a cover on top of it. So as I'm heading out, I thought, let me check the bathroom if I've taken everything. So I go into the bathroom, I realized that there was one piece of underwear that I didn't put in the bag, and there was nowhere I was going to take off the bag. So I took that underwear and I put it in my handbag, something that I've never done before. Headed to the airport, checked in my bag right through to Zimbabwe, got to Zimbabwe to collect my bag, and it wasn't there. So the entire bag disappeared. I went to the baggage claim place to check when I'll get my bag back. They told me I should come in the evening. Long story short, the bag never made it to Zimbabwe. Fortunately, I'm one of those people who do not like the cold. So when I left Cape Town, I was wearing a number of tops. So for the 5 days that I was in Zimbabwe, I was changing around the tops that I had. And the underwear that was in my bag ended up being a God intervention because at the end of it all, I had 2 pieces of underwear. So in the morning, I'll wake up, take a bath, wash my underwear, look for the sun, and then put it in just to make sure that it will dry. And as much as I had 2 pieces of underwear, I was very, very uncomfortable because I was thinking, if it doesn't dry, what am I going to wear the next day? But anyways, it all worked out, came back to South Africa, found my bag, the story finished, I thought. A year later, exactly a year later, a friend told me that she was donating secondhand underwear to orphans in Zimbabwe. And it took me back to my experience a year ago where I had 2 pieces of underwear and I wasn't comfortable. So it made me wonder how these children were feeling having to wear underwear that wasn't theirs. So it started bothering me. The more it bothered me, the more I got bothered by why I'm bothered by the situation. Because as a trauma counselor, I was dealing with huge cases and they were life-threatening cases, and now I'm being bothered by underwear. But as the entire weekend progressed, I then realized that was something that I needed to address. So the following day, which was the 13th of October 2014, I launched a donation drive on Facebook, seeking for donations. I had no plan, no resources. All that I had was a desire to help. So people started contacting me, wanting to see how they can help. A friend of mine called Lisa, she came to visit and she said, you can't have an initiative that doesn't have a name. So what is it that you want to do? I was like, okay, I want to restore the dignity of the orphans. So we Googled what dignity meant in Shona. We came up with the name Ruremekedzo. So I continued doing the Facebook post, and the plan was to help both boys and girls, making sure that they had at least 3 pieces of new underwear, and also paid for girls who were over the age of 9. Because what I started hearing from people was that they didn't have access to pads, so it didn't make sense to give them underwear and you couldn't give them sanitary pads. And gratefully, friends and family started donating. So the first handover, that was in December 2014. The first picture is donations that I received from Isa's mom. They are based in the Netherlands. So on her 60th birthday, instead of asking for presents, she then asked her family and friends to donate the pads and the underwear that you can see. The second picture is my friend and sister helping me packing. And the third photo, those were our first beneficiaries. And just to highlight that all the photos that I'm going to be sharing, I've been given permission to share. So for this donation drive, we had 150 beneficiaries from 6 different orphanages. So coming back to Cape Town, I had a dilemma, so I didn't know how am I going to proceed. It was never in my wildest dreams that I think I'll be speaking about underwear and sanitary pads. So I then decided to go and speak to my pastor because I wanted to find out how should I progress. Should I continue on this path? Because growing up, all I'd been thinking about was being a counselor and maybe opening a counseling center. So when I spoke to my pastor, he said 2 things, that I needed to find out if this is a project or it's a ministry. A project has a timeline, so you've got a start date and an end date. But if it's a ministry, it's for a lifetime. So my pastor then said I needed to go back and pray and seek God for guidance. I remember when I was in the office in January 2015, I walked out very confused and actually quite disappointed because I thought he was going to give me the answers. So what I ended up doing, I spent the next 3 months praying and asking God for directions. So during this time, in 2015, there was xenophobic attacks that affected South Africa. Refugees in Durban, Cape Town, and Johannesburg were affected. So at the trauma center, we had a lot of clients coming in seeking for safety and direction on how they should proceed. So when this then happened, we became very busy at the trauma center, and then during the week I went to church. And when we were at church, our pastor then encouraged us that we need to do something to support the refugees. In my mind, I thought I was doing the best I could through the counseling services that I was providing, but that night I couldn't sleep. So I then decided to launch a donation drive. So as you can see, the first picture that was also taken during the 2015 xenophobic attack. So when they happened, the South Africans would come and tell the refugees that they have to leave with what they are wearing. These 2 men were fortunate enough to run away with whatever that they are holding. But in most cases, they just leave their places wearing what they are wearing. The second photo, actually, sorry, just to backtrack. So when I then did the donation drive, I thought that within 2 weeks, people would respond and I would have a lot of donations, but actually it took me almost 2 months to get the donations because people were not donating, unlike when I did the one for orphanages in Zimbabwe. That's when I realized that people didn't understand the price of refugees. So the second photo, we were busy doing the packing. And then the third one, we managed to raise enough funds to donate 122 care packs to people who were affected in Durban. So the key lessons from the 2015 drive was that there was a lack of understanding on the plight of refugees. And the second thing that I learned from that process was that as much as I was asking for underwear and pads, people started donating toothpaste, toothbrushes. And out of that, I then changed the focus for it to be providing an emergency care pack. In the emergency care pack, we put pads, underwear, toothbrush, toothpaste, towel, and soap. So the whole idea is that when someone has been affected by a humanitarian crisis, they only have the clothes that they have, and they are in need of these basic things. So since 2015, we've been providing care packs. So I'm going to take you through just a summary of what happens when a humanitarian crisis happens. So the first thing is I hear about it, and then I now need to Google to find out where is the crisis and are we able to help. The picture that you can see on the slide, this is a crisis that happened in 2017 in Cape Town. One of the EAAMO settlements was affected by a fire, 4,000 people were displaced, and 1 person was killed. So we're able to donate 250 care packs. So once you know about the humanitarian crisis, the next thing is to search for a distribution partner. It's much easier to handle shipping whilst you're in South Africa, but if it's a place like Mozambique or Somalia, I'm still working alone. Most of the work I'm doing it alone. So I normally look for a distribution partner, and over the past 9 years, I've partnered with embassies, with airlines, and other organizations who are then able to take the donations to the next place. The third aspect is fundraising. So with the work that I'm doing, as I have just highlighted, I do it mostly alone. There's some people who will share my posts. So most of the donations drives, I run them through WhatsApp statuses and Facebook posts. So this is one example of a WhatsApp status that I put during the pandemic when we're helping people who had been affected by the pandemic and had lost their sources of income. The next stop is shopping. So once we have raised enough funds, we then go for shopping. The picture there, that's my friend's son. They are based in Johannesburg, I'm in Cape Town. So when I now need to send donations, sometimes they have to be sent through Johannesburg. So my friend then helps doing the shopping in Johannesburg. Instead of me buying the stuff in Cape Town, sending them to Johannesburg and then to wherever they need to go. So they normally help me with the shopping. The next part is the packing. So what we normally do, we host packing picnics. I post on Facebook or on WhatsApp, invite people to come through to help with the packing so that it goes fast. But normally this can easily take half the day, depending on how many KPIs we are packing. And then finally, we then do the shipping, depending where things are going here. This was in 2015. 2016 actually, these donations were heading to a refugee camp in Somalia. And then finally, is the handover. So this process can easily take between 2 months to 6 months, depending with what kind of help we have received. What you can see on the photo, that's my friend who's based in Victoria. We were donating care packs to people who had been displaced in Haiti by a hurricane. So since 2014, we have managed to donate to 10 different countries. We've partnered with 14 different organizations. And in terms of care packs, we've distributed 2,710 care packs. And then in 2020, when the COVID pandemic happened, we had to expand our vision and start helping people who had been affected financially. So the first thing was the fire that happened in one of the areas in Cape Town, and we helped the family with replacing some of the gadgets that they had lost, and also money for them to find a new home. The second photo was an unemployed mom who had lost her job during the pandemic. We helped her to get a stuff for a baby. And the third one is a boy who had stopped going to school because the mom couldn't afford fees. So he was one of our first beneficiaries. And over the past 3 years, we've continued to help families. So what are the potential solutions that we can get from tech? I'm just going to come a bit closer so that I can see what I wrote. So the first one is for, in terms of the humanitarian crisis, is that it's very difficult to find all the information that you need. So sometimes just Googling and trying to find that information can take a very long time. And I think technology can help to make sure that people who are helping people who have been displaced, they can get the information very fast and in a very short space of time. The second one is searching for a distribution partner. So what normally happens if you Google now that there has been a crisis in Kenya, most organizations will ask for monetary donations, like we said earlier, because it's easier to do that. However, one of the things that we have realized is that it's very rare for them to donate sanitary pads. So, for instance, at the beginning of the year when there was a Turkey earthquake, I came across a video. One of the organizers was asking for donations for sanitary pads. And that's how we ended up sending sanitary pads to Turkey. So there is a need to find a distribution partner who's willing and able to take the donations to the different places. The third thing is fundraising. So most of the work that I've done it through WhatsApp and Facebook posts, but not everyone is on social media. So there is room for there to be a place where potential donors can register and at least know that there is a humanitarian crisis that has occurred and they can donate through that platform. The fourth thing is packing care packs. Like I highlighted earlier, it can take the entire day depending on how many care packs. Sometimes it actually takes days. So technology can also help through a packing system that can be quite efficient. Shipping also takes a very long time. When I did the Somalia drive, I would do the paperwork, they would come back to me and say it's wrong. I don't know how many times I would say, I'm sorry, my sincere apologies. It took me a very long time to get used to how to fill in the applications, but if there is a platform where it actually tells you step by step how to do the processes, that would also help. And then the last thing is the handover. Out of the many donation drives that we have done over the past 9 years, I have only been to 2 of them. Most of them is the partners who have handed over on my behalf. So one of the things that I think would really help as well is having a platform where you can check where the donations are up to the point where they have been donated. One of the things that I made, there was Cyclone Idai in 2019. So I managed to get the South African Airways to help with the shipping. But when they shipped the donations, they went to Maputo, only to learn on the day that they arrived that the organization that was going to do the handover was in Beira, and that's 1,200 kilometers away. So it had there been an app or a platform that would actually tell me this is where they are, this is where the donations can be delivered, that would have helped. The last thing where I feel that technology can help is when it comes to refugees and asylum seekers. Most of them, they don't have access to internet or Wi-Fi. So with that, when they now need to renew their papers, it takes a very long time. And sometimes that leads to them becoming undocumented. So there has to be a platform that allows them, number one, for the information to be in their language and for them to be able to access the devices easily for them to do what they need to do to remain documented and also know where they can apply for jobs because most of them are unemployed. So finally, my question to you is, what can you contribute to address these challenges? 9 years ago on this day, it would have been 17 days since I launched my first drive. Back then, it would been very difficult to think I'll be in Boston talking about my experiences, because all it started with was a desire to help. So my challenge to you is, whatever gifts, skill that you have, please look into how can you help, especially when it comes to refugees and asylum seekers. Because currently, if you look at where the world is, we have a number of wars that are going on. There's the war in Israel and Palestine, there's the Russia and Ukraine war. In Africa, we have a number of wars happening, meaning that the number of refugees and asylum seekers is going to grow. And I would really like to encourage you to look at how you can use your skills to help those who've been affected. Thank you very much.
Time for a fantastic talk. We have time for a couple of questions.
I guess I have a question about how you figure out what to put in the care packs and whether or not you sort of vary that depending on the situation and stuff. Like I imagine there's sort of different families need different things, you know, family with 3 babies is gonna be different. One with 2 teenagers, something like. How does one deal with it? Like it seems that you sort of there's some conflict probably between packing all these things ahead of time and sort of having the right flexibility to give not waste stuff and give people things they actually need at the other end. How do you deal with that?
Okay, so I think based on my work with refugees and how they extend their journeys from leaving the Democratic Republic of Congo, for instance, and coming to South Africa, one thing that I would always say is I only had the clothes on my back. So from there, that's when I started realizing that what was very important was the underwear. For the women is the sanitary pads. What also normally happens is that when we go through a crisis, our period comes abnormally. So if let's say you're expecting it 3 weeks later, because you're highly stressed, you end up going on your periods unexpected. And then the towel, the soap, actually but if there is time, I'll show you a video later on, or anyone wants to see it. But someone was talking about how when we helped them in 2017, that's exactly what they needed, the kids and the adults. So those things are the basic things that they normally don't get from the big organizations, which makes sense because most of the organizations have to do the food, the blankets and the shelter. So just looking at those basic things that people don't normally provide.
Thank you, fantastic talk. I don't know if you could share a little bit about your vision of how you see technology for refugees in 5 to 10 years. What directions are you imagining that they should take?
Very good question, and I'm not able to answer it. But I think the basic thing is for them to have access to devices, for them to be able to know how to use the devices. But if you look at the refugees who came from where I'm coming from, they don't even have access to the phone and they don't know how to operate. So I think it's making technology accessible to them. That's number one. Number two, for it to be in their language, because most of them they don't even speak English and they're expected to fill in the application process with English. So for it to be able to be translated. And then the third thing would be Wi-Fi access, but with Wi-Fi access also comes with employment for them to be able to afford.
I was just gonna ask something similar around the fact that if you're not from the continent or don't interact with these communities, you miss the fact that there's so much indigenous diversity in language.
Yeah.
So even within many of these communities that are indigenous to South Africa, communication, right, is key. And so I wonder how you're able to navigate those barriers or that language barrier to be able to even figure out how to get them connected to the job market. And then also, what does follow-up look like? I mean, after the care package, one knows that the need is just so much greater. Are you tracking, are there ways for us to sort of think about, creating technological networks to try to help them stay connected, to keep on asking for support?
Thank you for the question. So the first one, I'll give an example at the trauma center, because sometimes when they get the refugees, it's very difficult for us to communicate with the refugees, so they have to have a translator. So I think it goes back again in ensuring that if whatever communication that's going to happen, it has to be in their language. So fortunately, because we're now living in a global village, there are different people who speak the same language who can be able to assist. And then the second one was follow up. That used to bother me actually, because we also want to have the CAPEX help, what difference have they made? But unfortunately, in a crisis situation, people also move quite regularly. So my vision is, at least at that point, we help them, and trusting that the bigger organizations will be able to continue providing care. The second way that we have addressed the follow-up is when we partner in Zimbabwe, we have partnered with an organization called the Evangelistic Fellowship of Zimbabwe. So when we provide support, we provide to communities that they have identified and that they will continue to support. So with that, then that also helps. So sometimes it works that we partner with the organization that's already providing support to that community. But when it comes to humanitarian crisis, when people have been displaced, unfortunately, people move quite fast. But at least you know that they have underway and paid for that time.
One last question. Fantastic. The session, and now we have the last piece of the prayer.